the rap. His temper, that's what AIG to FP traders always mention whenever they talk about their old boss, Joe Casano. Yes, they will also take note of his wide-ranging intelligence and the way he knew every FP employee's name and the pleasure he took in handing out multi-million dollar bonuses each December, like Santa Claus, recalls a former executive. But his temper tended to dominate conversation about him because that's what everyone at FP had to cope with every day. It was brutal and indiscriminate, terrifying when unleashed, says an ex-trader. Sometimes he could seem uncontrollable. Casano would rage at traders who were making the company a fortune, and traders who were on a losing streak. He would go out of his way to embarrass executives in front of their peers and blow up over the most inconsequential things. Talking to him was like walking on eggshells, says another former FP executive. You were always worried about what would set him off. Once, he got made because a trader wore a V-neck sweater over a t-shirt. From 2 desks over, he loudly barred the man and then sent him home to change into a colored shirt. A new hire speaking to Casano for the first time told him that the first was making 50 basis points on a certain 1 billion transaction. I say that was 5 million a year, recalls the trader. Casano erupted. How dare you do the math on me? He was a bully. It was his fatal flaw. Casano had taken over AIG to FP when Tom Sabe retired in 2001, though he had been Sabe's top deputy. It was no sure thing that Casano would get the top job, but Hans Greenberg had taken a shine to Casano, a thought up from the streets manager who cared about AIG to the exclusion of all else. Casano surely reminded Greenberg of himself. It also helped that Casano never forgot who was boss. Jay managed Hunt beautifully, says a former colleague. Casano had learned the derivatives trade from the ground up, having begun his FP career in the bank office. In the late 1980s, when the London office was floundering, Safe moved him there to fix the situation. He did, making London his home and traveling to the Connecticut office 1 week a month. When AIG to FP first began selling credit default swap, Casano ran the business. He may have lacked a degree in high finance, but nobody could say he didn't know derivatives. He also cared deeply about the business. His former employees all stressed that as well. Whenever an executive say a deal couldn't be done because of some deficiency with FP, Cassano would respond with fury. He took that kind of thing personally, says a former trader. In his eyes, you were blaming his company for why you were ineffective. In his mind, FP had no deficiencies. Cassano's devotion to FP was also why his former colleagues all said that he would never, ever do anything that they thought might damage it, which, in retrospect, was the most surprising thing about him. Joe Cassano was positively risk averse. Ever since Howard Sossin's departure in 1993, Greenberg had instead insisted that FP executives defer half their compensation to protect against the later going sour. Cassano himself went much further. In 2007, for instance, he was paid 38 million, but pulled out only 1.225 million, keeping the rest in his deferred compensation pool. He had no incentive to take foolish risks. Whenever FP devised a new product, he took it to Greenberg to get the CEO's blessing. He made traders pull back from positions he thought were becoming too risky. The company took minimal risk, says one former trader. When deals were brought to him, Cassano would pick them apart looking for hidden risk. He would say, "Be careful out there, don't take big positions," recalls the former trader. He wasn't a cowboy. It was an extremely well-run business, this trader continues. But there was one blind spot. The blind spot was AIG to FP's credit default swap business. Ever since that original bistro deal with JP Morgan, FP had created a profitable niche by taking on the risk of insuring the super senior tranches of CDOs. These were the top tier AAA tranches, the ones that got hit only if all the lower tranches got wiped out. Although it had been a sexy little business in the beginning with innovative deals and healthy margins, it had become fairly humdrum. For the first 4 or 5 years, the credit default swap business was focused primarily on corporate credits, first writing protection against the possibility that a particular company's debt might default, and then insuring the super senior tranche of CDOs that were primarily made up of corporate loans. But as competitors entered the business, the spreads narrowed and the profits dwindled. Soon, FP's traders were looking for new ways to use credit derivatives to make money. FP found several things. It created a business aimed at helping banks, primarily European banks, evade their capital rules. AIG to FP sold credit default swap to banks that held a variety of highly rated paper. The FP wrap, as it was called, allowed them to decrease their capital. There was nothing illegal about this, saying capital relief had become widespread ever since the adoption of rights-based capital standards. Nor did FP hide what it was doing. It called the business, appropriately enough, regulatory capital. By the time of the financial crisis, AIGFP had insured around 200 billion of highly rated bank assets. And in 2004, AIG-2FP began selling credit protection on AAA tranche of a new kind of CDO, called a multi-sector CDO. In this, AIGFP was following the evolution of the CDO business itself, which had gone from Bistro, a CDO made up of one bank's corporate loan portfolio, to CDOs that consider of disappeared corporate credits, to his new multi-sector CDO. Multi-sector CDOs were highly diversified kitchen sinks, as one FP trader put it, that include everything from student loan to credit card debt to prime commercial real estate mortgage-backed securities to a smattering of subprime residential mortgage-backed securities. The theory, as always, was that diversification would protect against losses. The different asset classes in a multi-sector CDO were supposed to be uncorrelated. A Yale economist named Gary Gordon was hired to work up the Reichs model, which showed naturally that the possibility of loss reaching the super senior traders was so tiny as to be nearly non-existent. To FP's executives, grabbing the super senior feel like free money. The executives who market credit default swap for AIG-FP was all frost. Many FP executives were wary of him, viewing him as someone who had a way of shoehorning his way into business started by others, but he was a Casano favorite and a member of the boss' inner circle. Like everyone else, he feared Casano's temper. He was more worried about Joe's temper than about bringing him straight information, says someone who worked with him. By the time FP was getting into the multi-sector CDO business, Hank Greenberg was in his late 70s. He still didn't have a succession plan. He still ruled AIG with an iron fist, and he was still heralded as the great man of modern insurance. Even though by 2004 AIG ranked 10th on the Fortune 500 with almost 100 billion in revenue and more than 11 billion in profits, Greenberg still managed to churn out 50% earning gains each year. It seemed a miracle. As ever, the intricacies of AIG remain largely in Hank Greenberg's head, and those intricacies had become truly bewildering, beyond the ken of most mere mortals. When AIG set up a new subsidiary, it often launched a dozen or more surrounding subsidiaries to take advantage of tax laws, reinsurance possibilities, a whole gamut of small advantages. It has literally hundreds of such subsidiaries. There was a kind of scheming mentally, say someone familiar with the AIG culture. They always seem to be thinking, how do we beat the system? Most CDOs have maybe a half dozen top executive reporting directly to them. Greenberg had nearly 30 direct reports. That meant that only Greenberg and maybe his longtime sidekick Ed Matthews had a complete grasp of AIG's convoluted business. It also meant that nobody besides Greenberg and Matthews understood all the risks the company was taking. In other firms, there are checks and balances, says a former AIG consultant. So far as I could tell, AIG had no formal rights function. In effect, Han Greenberg was AIG's one-man rights department. Han ran the company unlike any other 20th century company, says another AIG consultant. Even though it had gotten huge, there was no big company infrastructure. The systems were completely antiquated. It still gathered its earning data every quarter by hand, and all decisions were made by him to a remarkable degree. To put it another way, while outsiders might have thought they were saying an earnings machine, insiders saw something that more resembled a Rube Goldenberg contraption. Why did AIG have such an antiquated infrastructure? Because Greenberg didn't like to pay for anything that didn't generate revenue, so he scrimped on computers and software that other companies bought as a matter of course, and refused to pay the salaries necessary to hire a first-rate operation staff. Why did he have 30 director reports? Because that way he could keep all his division managers segregated from each other. Han wanted people to operate with the idea that they had their own little private P&L and they were only responsible for what happened in their cell, says a former AIG executive. Many of AIG subsidiaries were also interlocking. So, for instance, National Union Fire Insurance Company, a big insurance subsidiary, had a significant ownership stake in ILFC, AIG, Airplane Leasing Company, and Operation Kill AIG Foreign Life, an overseas life insurance company that was one of the company's crown jewels, had a large portion of its capital in AIG stock, and of course SICO, the company that Greenberg used to accumulate his top executive retirement money, and which he himself ran, was AIG's largest stockholder. Although Greenberg obviously was in command of everything that went on at AIG, its formal internal control and process, the key that every public company has in place, were decidedly subpar. AIG's longtime banker was Goldman Sachs. The firm was constantly involved in AIG deals, and Greenberg had close ties with the firm's top investment bankers. Yet, yet one former Goldman banker recalls that whenever a new deal was in the works, the junior bankers working on it would find, as he put it, deficiencies in AIG's internal control. In the due diligence calls, the company always did end run around or question and say they were aware of internal control problems and were working on fixing them. If we weren't satisfied with the answer, he would have to go to senior relationship people at Goldman and get the go ahead for the deal. Half the time, he adds, the senior people didn't want to hear any shit about AIG's problems. The deals always got done. And then there was AIG rights taking. Thought he had built a very large company, Greenberg still wanted his executives to be risk-taking entrepreneurs in the way they approach their business. He repeatedly made the point that AIG's balance sheet was so big and so highly rated that AIG could take risks that no other company had the strength to take. Say a former executive, that was the whole point of having a AAA after all. AIG could take more risk and be rewarded for it. Being that big and that prone to risk taking, it's just not a good combination, says a former AIG executive. Thus, though, those two things together do not equal prudence. It was around the same time, with the stock sliding and the market wondering if AIG was finally bumping up against the law of big numbers, that the company found itself in a series of small scandals. The first came in 2001. The SEC accused AIG's National Unit of constructing what amounted to a sham insurance transaction to help a company called BrightPoint hide nearly $12 million in losses a few years earlier. It was some stinkiest insurance deal that they did that fucked around with the current accounting at the end of the day, says a former executive, and yet it took 2 years to settle the case, years in which AIG and Greenberg infuriated the Even as the SEC was prosecuting the BrightPoint deal, the agency opened up a second AIG investigation. This was a much bigger deal, and the guilty party this time was AIG to FP. The SEC eventually charged FP with conducting a series of fraudulent transactions that helped PNC, the big Pittsburgh bank, hide more than $715 million in dubious loans. The allegations were serious enough that the Justice Department opened a criminal investigation. Once again, it took several years to settle the case, this time with AIG agreeing to pay a fine on $8 million, with additional $46 million in restitution. FP also signed a deferred prosecution agreement with the Justice Department, an extremely serious consequence. The fine, however, would have been $12 million less, but from the fact that of the last minute, Greenberg reneged on the original settlement with the agency, vowing to fight the charge. AIG's even issued a press release calling the government's action unwarranted. The SEC was furious, and the AIG board was shocked. It demanded that Greenberg settle, in addition to the extra $12 million and the deferred prosecution agreement. The government installed a full-time monitor inside AIG, in effect a government compliance officers. In late 2003, with the PNC investigation in full swing, Cassano met with Greenberg, as he did every year, to show him how he planned to distribute the FP business. As they were going through the numbers, Greenberg said, Joy, if we're paying a fine on PNC, it is going to come out of your pocket, meaning the FP bonus pool. Cassano was startled. We're partners, he replied. We split things down the middle, good or bad. That's our argument. Greenberg said, I don't go for people breaking the law. I'm telling you, I'm not picking it up. First now, Cassano flashed Greenberg the temper that the FP traders knew so well. Go fuck yourself, he said, pushing his finger in Greenberg's face. Calm down, Joe, said Greenberg. Don't get upset. Cassano did calm down, and Greenberg took the SEC fine out of FP's bonus pool. There wasn't a thing Cassano could do about it. You would think that, by now, Greenberg would have learned at least one lesson, that a company accused of wrongdoing shouldn't give the government the back of its hand. All that did was cause the government to dig in its heels. Thanks to Enron in particular, the rules had changed. The kind of earnings management that had routinely gone on in corporate America was no longer okay. State insurance regulators, who had long looked the other way at some of AIG's accounting, were stifling their spins. But Greenberg, stubborn to the end. Expect the same kind of difference from government official that he routinely received from the corporate world and from his employees, which is why it was all the more unfortunate that the next government official to go after AIG was Eliot Spitzer, the Attorney General of New York. Spitzer, who was preparing to run for governor, reveled in taking on tough guys like Greenberg. By 2004, Spitzer had become the scourge of Wall Street. He had exposed conflicts of interest by Wall Street analysts and dug into sleazy behavior in the mutual fund industry. He had swept another tough guy, Ricardo Grasso, the former head of the New York Stock Exchange, attempting to claw back some of Grasso's 114 million pay package. Most recently, he had turned his attention to the insurance industry. His original target was Marsh and McLennan, the world's largest insurance broker, which it so happened was run by Greenberg's eldest son, Jeffrey. In October 2004, brandishing a raft of incriminating emails, Spitzer accused the company of conducting a long-running bid-rigging scheme. He also said he wouldn't even begin to talk about a settlement until Jeffrey Greenberg resigned. The Marsh board quickly fired Greenberg. 4 months after that, Marsh and McLean agreed to pay $815 million restitution and apologized for its shameful conduct. Among the insurance company accused of paying kickbacks to Marsh was AIG. Several AIG executives pleaded guilty for their role in the scheme. Once the Spitzer subpoena arrived, a special committee of directors began an internal investigation. AIG's accounting firm, PricewaterhouseCoopers, was brought into through the company's books. They were finding problems everywhere, recalls a former AIG executive. It turned out that certain aspects of FP's derivatives accounting were incorrect. Some insurance transactions had to be unwound. Deals that walk right up to the line, which PwC had once okayed, were now ruled out of bonus. And there was another problem. The company had promised to cooperate with Spitzer, and he wanted to depose Greenberg. The board wanted to know whether Greenberg was going to plead to Fifth Amendment. Greenberg said he wasn't sure. How could the CEO take the Fifth and keep his job? The climatic board meeting took place on March 30, 2005, It lasts all day, with the director discussing among themselves whether to fire Greenberg, and Greenberg calling him from his boat and his airplane, arguing that he should keep his job. He had an odd way of going about it, thought. You people don't know what you're doing. He berated them. You don't even know how to spell insurance. Toward the end of the meeting, the accounts from PwC told the board that it would no longer vouch for the firm's books if Greenberg stayed as CEO, and that was that. Greenberg was allowed to stay on as chairman of the board, though that arrangement wouldn't last long either. His replacement as CEO was a blunt AIG lifer named Martin Sullivan, who had spent his entire career on the insurance side of AIG. Although Sullivan had a tremendous amount of insurance experience because of the way Greenberg ran the company, he knew very little about AIG to FP. Immediately after Greenberg's departure, the rating agencies dropped AIG's rating to AA. Over the next few months, the intensity level inside the company was almost unbearable. Asbury subsidiary was turned inside out by swarms of accountants. It was like a war zone, says a former executive. In July, AIG announced its restatement. The company will reduce its earnings by $4 billion covering the previous 5 years. In those 5 years, AIG had reported around $40 billion in profits. The new numbers lowered AIG's profits by 10%. In other words, AIG didn't really have to play games. 36 billion in profits will still have earned it plenty of respect. It's just that Greenberg will have been seen as a mere mortal instead of the great good or insurance. Alain Karauglan, a Wall Street analyst who had followed AIG for years, wrote several sharing reports in the wake of Greenberg's legislation. One in particular starts out after taking a close look at the foreign life unit, the same subsidiary that was always said to be one of the crown jewels. He concluded that there were significant gaps between statutory earnings report in the 10K and our summation of statutory account principal SAP earnings for the operating entities. In other words, try as he might, he could not make the earnings that AIG had reported for foreign life add up. Not long before Hank Greenberg was ousted, an FP executive named Hen Park got a call from an old high school friend who was trying to buy his first house. The price of the house was $250,000, millions. The friend didn't make a lot of money, yet two mortgage originators had lined up to give him loans, one for the first mortgage and the second for a loan to cover the down payment. The friend wanted to know if Park would lend him 500, no, 5,000 to cover the closing cost, which he also didn't have, though a little startled by what he'd heard. Park loaned him the money. Shortly before the closing, the man lost his job. He called Park again, worried that the deal would fall through, but it didn't when the friend told his mortgage broker that he was now out of work. The broker simply told him not to mention it. Sure enough, he closed on the house. No, Park was really startled. A few months later, Park read an article in the Wall Street Journal touting the high dividend being paid by a hot mortgage company, New Century. He decided to take a closer look at the stock and realized that New Century was a subprime lender that specialized in new dog loans. He quickly dropped the idea of investing in it. Then a third data point popped up on his radar screen. In a trade publication somewhere, he read that multi-sector CDOs had very large concentration of subprime mortgage. By the spring of 2005, All Frost was marketing a veritable assembly line of multi-sector CDO deals. FP had 10 of 15 in the pipeline at any given time. It was almost mechanical, said someone who was there. They were so routine. They got very little scrutiny from the risk managers or anyone else at AIG FP. Every firm on Wall Street was going to AIG to buy credit defaults swap on their super senior tranches. Though his spreads remained small, the sheer volume of business made it a big profit center for FP. In February 2006, Frost and Park went to big annual asset-backed securities convention in Las Vegas. There were thousands of people in attendance. Everyone who was anyone in the securitization business was there. They had meetings with all the firms they did business with. Frost introduced them to Park and explained that AIG-FP will be taking another look at the business. Everyone knew what that meant. During that period, he was not happy, recalled someone who worked with Frost. He thought Park was trying to undermine his business to make him look bad. He thought he was turning over the crown jewels. He personally took offense. After the crisis, it would be revealed that FP did not completely turn off the spigot at the end of 2005, even though that it's one the company later told the world. By the time 2005 had come to a close, the firm had a number of deals still in the pipeline. Not wanting to anger its clients, AIG-FP decided to close those deals, which meant it was continuing to issue multi-sector CDOs well into 2006. What's more, under the terms of the swap contracts it wrote, CDO managers had the right to switch collateral to help maintain the yield without having to inform AIG. As borrowers prepaid mortgage, for instance, the CDO managers would replace those earlier mortgage with mortgage that had been written in 2006 and 2007. Those later mortgage written as the housing bubble was reaching its peak were far worse than even the mortgage written in 2005. And with Greenberg now gone, there was literally not a single executive at AIG's headquarters who knew that a decline in the market value of the tranches AIG wrapped could trigger a collateral call, but that will only emerge much later, over the course of the next year, as the subprime bubble spiked and then began to crack. Cassano, Foster, and Park all truly believed they had dodged a bullet.